Warning! The following video has spoilers for all of Deltarune as of July 2026. You have been warned! Alright, with Deltarune Chapter 5 having finally released, it put to bed a lot of debates and predictions. Well, except for Neo Woody theory. I know yellow wasn't literally a manifestation of the cowboy show, but Flowery references it when yellow first shows up, and there are multiple Toy Story references, and I literally said the cowboy would be an ally and the chapter would be nostalgia-based, and... Anyway, we now have only 2 chapters left to go before Deltarune is over, meaning that, as far as I'm concerned anyway, we know more about the game than we don't. And the rest of the community seems to agree with this sentiment, because among all the speculation and debates about Gaster and the shelter and how the weird route will go into Chapter 7, there seems to be one thing that the fanbase is rather unanimous on, that Chapter 6 will be taking place in the Holiday Manor. See, Chapter 5 ended off pretty clearly telling us that Noelle will be joining us for Chapter 6, in the Dark World. Susie tells Kris that it's time for these adventures to stop being between the two of them, and that they need help. That Noelle specifically needs to be in on this with them. And can I just say, this really is Susie's love showing, because why the fuck aren't you getting Birdly to help? Like, he's strong, man! But anywho, we get a whole montage right at the end of Chapter 5 of Susie preparing Castletown for Noelle's arrival. Pair this up with the fandom collectively agreeing that the idea of a Holiday Manor Dark World would be really cool, especially with December's room being in there, and that's how we get to the current common census. But that's not all either. There's a lot of people that feel like Des has not been set up well enough, since Asgore does not explicitly name her and go all in depth about December specifically at the end of Chapter 5, which honestly, I don't see why he would in the context of the story. Kris knows who December is, and it's not like Asgore knows we're possessing them, but that's besides the point. There's some interesting dialogue in Chapter 2 with Noelle and Rudy in the hospital. They're playing Dragon Blazers together, which we now know is based on Lord of the Hammer, which was based on the prophecy. Rudy questions why Noelle would use an ice spell instead of fire shock on the ice boss, to which Noelle replies she would love to use fire shock, but the mage left the party. And wouldn't you know it, in Chapter 5, Ralsei does indeed show off that he can use fire magic. So I'd say this is pretty clear foreshadowing that we're going to an ice-themed Dark World. However, Holiday Manor is not the only icy location in Hometown. And by the end of this video, I think I'll have you convinced that Holiday Manor is just a bit too easy of an option. This, my friends, is Icy, the Cryptid's palace. So before we begin, yes, other people have made videos about Icy and Deltarune before, and I'll link a few of the most notable ones in the description. David Amiago and Raginade both made Icy videos pre-Chapter 5 that are both pretty good. And funnily enough, even though this was a Chapter 2 era video, Cammy G did actually predict that Chapter 6 would take place in Icy's. But why, right? What's the significance of this damn thing? Well, like with a lot of things, we start with Undertale. And you want to know the really funny thing about Icy in Undertale? He appears in one place and one place only, and it's Sans' word jumble. Yeah, Icy isn't a food mascot or anything else in Undertale, unless you count the 10th anniversary stream, in which he's the school mascot, but come on, Toby Fox wasn't thinking about that in 2015. And the strangest thing about this word jumble is that it's got a really weird fun value event. I don't think I need to explain what a fun value event is to you, but just know, it's not some silly shit. There's a whole nother snowman that shows up on the paper here with a text that just says nightmare. But don't tell the Jevil fans I said that, because they might think he'll be relevant next chapter. Funnily enough, this was actually one of the very few fun value events that were bugged that you could not access without editing your save file when Undertale first came out. The only other events that were like this were the Gaster related ones, which is crazy to me. And not because I think Icy is Gaster, despite me referencing the video that's titled that, but because I think it proves that Icy will be relevant to Deltarune. Hindsight is 2020, and I think it's pretty fair to say that Gaster was always intended to be the Deltarune guy from the very beginning. As far back as like 2016, you could go to Deltarune.com and read the prophecy in Wingdings. So is it really a coincidence that the only place we see Icy and Undertale at all is on an item handed to us by Sans, who is very clearly from Deltarune, to the point that now we literally have undeniable proof of where the punch card comes from in his laboratory? And that same item in Undertale has a weird fun value event saying nightmare and is oddly tied to the Gaster fun value events? But I hear you. There's gotta be some more concrete stuff in Deltarune itself for this to be believable at all. But just put a pin in the Sans idea for now, because I am gonna bring up Sans again later. Look, I'm going to gloss over the fact that Sans' word jumble is directly referenced in Chapter 2, and upon solving it, a green Icy shows up that then shatters into a million pieces and disappears. Okay, I'm not gonna feed all my green Gaster lovers today. You know why? Icy is inexplicably tied to the greater conspiracy of Deltarune, from Noel to December to Eram, and I'm not kidding. In Chapter 3, we first meet Eram on the sword route. In the secret game that Ram lets us play, we enter the shelter and encounter Eram, who tells us that they can see in the dark, before we go and duke it out and it starts summoning friends and shit. Everybody knows how big of a deal this is. The song that plays during this boss is titled Burning Eyes, and this title was actually foreshadowed in Chapter 2 by, you guessed it, Spamton. Upon seeing the soul for the first time, he said he's never seen a heart-shaped object like that before, and that his eyes are burning like, quote, DVDs of any movie at half price. Like, haha, Spamton, spam email, and, you know, illegal movie pirating, whatever. But there was one other place this was foreshadowed too, and it was during the Spamton sweepstakes. We got access to a page called deltarune.com/icy, and it's all about the recent sightings of Icy, as if he's some kind of cryptid, which I'm also going to come back to, so please put a pin in that as well. Anyways, there are two sightings that were submitted by Noel. In the first one, she claims that she went down to the kitchen to eat leftover pizza, and in the dark, Icy on the box of the pizza winked at her. Now, with most stories, you'd say that this is just a kid seeing things in the dark, but it's Deltarune. It's about dark worlds. I feel like this is something to keep note of. But the second sighting is far more interesting, and it's because Noel says that December Holiday burned out the eyes of the Icy pizza box. Huh, burned out the eyes, huh? Oh yeah, I almost forgot. You wanna know another place Icy's mentioned in Chapter 2? Right before Kris opens the dark fountain, when them and Susie are watching TV, Susie makes the comment that maybe Icy the movie is more their speed. Icy the movie. Icy's burned out eyes. My eyes are burning like DVDs of any movie at half price. Yeah, like I'm sure Icy the movie is more Kris's speed. Kris has been in that damn shelter before, and they went in there again to go see Eram, whose eyes are burned out, just like Icy's. But even removed from Eram, the Icy stuff gets weird in Chapter 3. During the Doom board with Tenna, there's this really scary, unskippable moment where Tenna's like, they're coming out of the pipes, they're crawling out of the pipes. And these little blobs start shuffling across the screen. In this moment that's got just scary ambience, and Tenna's tweaking the fuck out afterwards. And this isn't even like an optional thing. Again, this is mandatory. You have to see this. Those blobs are Icies. Fully animated Icies. Dark World Icies. Ask yourself, what would be the point of doing this? To fuck with us? This isn't Scott Cawthon we're talking about. I'm getting ahead of myself. I gotta dial it back for a second. Besides, if we were to go to Icy's in Chapter 6, what would it be about and why? What would make that a more appropriate dark world than the Holiday Manor, for example? And listen, you're gonna have to walk with me for a second, because the answer is Five Nights at Freddy's. When Chapter 5 released, Toby Fox gave us this message. In Chapter 4, we saw dark clouds on the horizon. That's why, let's not look there for now. Let's turn around and watch the sun before it goes down completely. Let's smile again. Let's have one more fun adventure, okay? Because truly, no matter how you slice it, we're definitely going to the shelter in Chapter 7. Especially if you believe the whole double doors thing, which was only subverted by Chapter 3. And yes, I know that Asgore's Flower King shop had one door, but the inside has a set of double doors, and we came out of those in Chapter 5. And once you know it, Icy's has a set of double doors too, and Holiday Manor does not. But that's besides the point. No matter what you think is truly going to be in the shelter, it is absolutely not going to be sunshine and rainbows. Gaster has always been associated with 666. And the depths? Well, they've been associated with hell since Chapter 1, when Jevil told us that hell's roar bubbles from the depths. Now, speaking of Chapter 1, there's an interesting line of dialogue in Hometown after the fact. Would you like to know what Pizza Pants says about Icy's the second you ask him about it? Make no mistake, little buddy. Icy's pizza is hell. Chapter 6 needs to bridge the gap tonally between Chapters 5 and 7. And what better way to do it than with this character, than with this location? Not to mention the fact that there is literally an employee here named Purple Guy who wears a mascot costume of Icy. And on the festival day, wouldn't you know it, we submerge him in water. You wanna know a crazy fun fact that I've seen literally nobody mention before? In the weird route, Purple Guy gets completely dissolved in the water that he gets dunked into at the festival. And considering that we skip literally all of Chapter 6 in the weird route, I'm honestly not surprised, because we probably would have encountered him. Because if there's anybody that knows the FNAF lore like the back of her hand, it's absolutely Noelle. I mean, hell, in Chapter 2, there is an Icy statue in the room that Queen makes for her, all because Noelle looked up, is Icy real cryptid? Could you imagine if the mascot costumes became darkeners while someone was wearing them? Let's look at Deltarune.com/Icy again. After Noelle says that December burned out Icy's eyes and he looked evil, Azriel says that they should bury the box, and Kris dug a hole in the ground in the graveyard, and Noelle was so scared a zombie would come up. All these facts about Icy's pizza combined makes it seem like a really thinly veiled FNAF parody to me. I will literally eat my shorts if this happens and Noelle does not reference Five Nights at Freddy's at least one time. She references Among Us in Chapter 4. It is insane how many appearances Icy has, and how infatuated Toby seems to be with him. Like, what's with the box over the head? But even within just the games, I mean, he shows up in the light world, in the dark world, and in Undertale itself completely unchanged. There's only one other entity in all of Toby Fox's creations who has this in common with Icy, and it's Everyman, who we first meet in the True Lab in Undertale. But speaking of the True Lab, I want you to think about reverse Undertale theory for a moment. If you don't know what that is, now's your chance to look it up in full, but it was absolutely not subverted in Chapter 5. The moment we got in there, we got a reference to the conveniently shaped bushes. There's even callbacks to the ruins in Chapter 5, with some of its architecture. But then, that leaves one location left, and yeah, it is the True Lab. I've said it once and I'll say it again. Chapter 6 needs to bridge the gap between chapters 5 and 7. I believe it is incredibly thematically appropriate for it to take a more horror-esque turn. And especially because Toby's told us that this chapter is easier to make than the others, which I assume includes chapter 7 as well, I think we should lower our expectations for what the overworld will look like. If we were going to say the Holiday Manor, I'd imagine that the overworld would be quite complex. But compare that to the interior of Icy's that we see in chapter 2, and you don't have much to work with. And if we're to expect a True Lab callback at some point, which I think we should definitely expect something like that, the new dialogue about Friend from Mew Mew all but confirms that Friend is an important character, and wouldn't you know it, they look just like Endogeny, who we also meet in the True Lab. I can't imagine that it'll be too complicated. But let's say you're sold on chapter 6 having some callbacks to the True Lab. I can hear some of you screaming already, isn't this evidence for a hospital dark world? What's tying Icy to the amalgamates in the True Lab at all? Well, my friends, do you remember the alleyway in which Alphys is leaving out milk for a cat that doesn't exist? Take a wild guess what two things are graffiti tagged on the wall in that alleyway. Everyman from the True Lab and Icy. Although, I'm seeing one problem right now. And it's a problem that a lot of Deltarune theories have. How would this work thematically? How does it tie into the actual story, beyond just the evidence within the world? So many Deltarune theories miss this crucial piece, and it's why so many of them end up not aging well. I tried to apply this logic with Neo-Woody theory, and wouldn't you know, it's why I got so many things about Chapter 5 right in that video, even if it wasn't everything. Ironically enough, the things that were most correct about Chapter 5 in that video were the things that didn't really have much to do with the cowboy show itself. So let's try to tie it into the story. But before we get into that, please make sure to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video, and if you want to support me and the people behind this channel, consider checking out the Patreon. It is the best way to support this channel, and we've got some really cool rewards that I think you guys would like, such as a community Discord, shoutouts, and a fully illustrated portrait of your sonar or favorite character at the end of every video. But enough of the plugs. Comparing the Icy Dark World idea to the other two big candidates I see most of the time, I believe the Hospital Dark World lacks the ice motif that is needed for Chapter 6. Remember what I said at the start of the video. It is very likely that this is the chapter where the mage leaves the party in favor of Noelle, who we know will be joining us in Chapter 6. Holiday Manor has that going for it, the ice motif. However, I don't see how that will allow us to tonally escalate into the shelter. We've explored the holiday house already. The closest thing we have there is December's room, and as much as I hate to say it, I don't think it's very likely. The whole house is Christmas themed, and less importantly anyway, the lack of double doors at the Holiday Manor also dissuade me from this idea. But then what about Icy? What would the theme of an Icy chapter be? As I predicted, the form of escapism that we witnessed in Chapter 5 was in fact nostalgia, so what will it be in Chapter 6? Well, I think the word was literally handed to us on a silver platter in Chapter 5. It's high time we talk about conspiracy theories. Icy is synonymous with conspiracy theories and cryptid culture. Icy is constantly referred to as a cryptid. There's constant weird, creepy imagery with him, and most importantly, Noelle is scared of him. And if Chapter 6 is going to focus a lot on Noelle, as I believe it will, Is that not perfect? During his monologue in Chapter 5, Asgore tells us that all of Hometown collectively agreed he was some kind of crazy conspiracy theorist the second he discovered Dark Worlds. What happens when Noelle goes down the same pipeline? She will be considered a conspiracy theorist too. The difference is, she actually is one. Not to mention the massive elephant in the room here, that all of Hometown seems to be wrapped up in one big, massive conspiracy, with the Knight and Kris and December and Friend and Warrendale Gaster all at the head of it. What better way to bring that to its rousing conclusion before the final chapter of the game than the character who is synonymous with all of these ideas? But I think we can take this a step further. Let's talk about our 3 main candidates for who will be opening the Dark Fountain. First and foremost, let's talk about Kris Dreamer. It has been repeatedly established to us that Kris used to get their jollies out of scaring Noelle. They used to pretend to be the human under the bed, knowing full well Noelle would be scared of that. They also used to tell Noelle that Icy eats kids. So if Kris is the one making this dark fountain that Noelle is entering with them into, it feels incredibly appropriate for it to be this manifestation of all those memories of theirs. The scary ones. Noelle talks a lot about how thrill and fear bring comfort to her. It's the whole reason why she's so infatuated with Susie. And if you're reading between the lines, Susie and Kris and Noelle's relationship is going to go through the ringer very soon. An Icy Dark World would bring all those memories about how Kris also made her feel that way back into the limelight, in a way that could prove to be very, very interesting, especially if Kris is the one making the Dark World. The next candidate is the Roaring Knight, and truth be told, I think it would be most interesting if the Knight makes this Dark World, specifically if the Knight is December Holiday. We know that the Knight created the Chapter 2 Dark World, Cyber City, and in that chapter, Noelle says that December always used to promise to take her to a place like this, a big city with flashing lights. Now imagine if the Roaring Knight also creates the Chapter 6 Dark World. Whether Dessa's mind is actually still in there or not, could you imagine if the next Dark World that Noelle enters, created by her own sister, is the exact opposite of the first one she entered? Whereas Cyber City is everything December promised to her, that everything Noelle wants. An Icy Dark World will be everything that makes Noelle scared, and this time she knows it's all real. Look at how jumpy Noelle was just from Alphys jump scaring her in Chapter 5 in the church. I mean, she's shaking after the fact. An Icy Dark World would crank that up to 1,000 and could make for some really interesting stuff. And last but not least, we have Noelle herself. We've seen Kris make a dark fountain, we've seen Susie make a dark fountain. I don't think it's out of the question for Noelle to create a dark fountain too. In Chapter 2, Queen shows all 3 of their portraits as examples of Lightners who could create a dark fountain. Noelle's the last one who hasn't done it yet. And considering how Noelle grew up scared of Icy and likely still is, and considering the fact that I'm speculating that Chapter 6's form of escapism will be conspiracy theories, to escape from reality in the form of just outright delusion, Noelle would be straight up manifesting all of her worst nightmares into reality. Her worst nightmares. Wow. Oh yeah, I mentioned how I wanted to bring up Sans again, right? Well, now's the time. Chapter 5 gave us the moment of finally finding out where the Don't Forget card comes from. I mentioned that earlier, but so far, Sans doesn't seem to give much of a shit about Ices. And all of us have been wondering when he's going to become relevant to Deltarune, because at some point he's going to have to travel to Undertale in some kind of machine. Well, why couldn't this coincide with Sans getting his hands on the word jumble? It's a very small tidbit, but for all the Sans loyalists who believe he will enter the Dark World at some point on screen, I think Ices would give a far better opportunity for that than literally any other option we have right now. I highly doubt he's going to suddenly become super relevant to the Dark World in Chapter 7. Do I think he'll be a boss? Probably not. Asgore wasn't, Tutorial wasn't, but he will definitely show up. Otherwise, I don't know how the hell Toby's gonna pull this one off. Now we've talked about Friend and Eram and Sans and how they all connect to Icy. But there's just one more plot thread that everybody's waiting for. One more event in the story that, unsurprisingly, I can connect to Icy too. And it's Kris losing their hand. There are several moments throughout the game that hint towards the idea that at some point, Kris is going to lose their hand, but I think we got the most blatant piece of foreshadowing as to when and where that's going to happen as far back as Chapter 1. This is the Warrior. You might have seen him around Hometown before. He resembles Icy so much it almost doesn't look like he's wearing a costume. But in Chapter 1, you don't find him at Icy's. And when you ask Pizza Pants about it, he tells you that he was hospitalized for pizza-related injuries. And upon entering the hospital and walking into the room where the Warrior's hospital bed lies, you will find him with casts over both hands. This might sound crazy what I'm about to say, but I think Kris is going to lose their hand and a pizza-related injury, too, involving the very cryptid they used to torture their childhood best friend with, Icy, in his ice palace. In summary, I believe the Chapter 6 Dark World will take place inside Icy's pizza, and that the theme of escapism in this chapter will be conspiracy and delusion. I believe Asgore sets this up perfectly in Chapter 5, and that it fits perfectly with Noelle's character too. And it'd provide Toby with a unique opportunity to criticize our conspiracies and our theories in a more direct way than he has with Bat-Tat. Furthermore, I see a very strong opportunity for Sans to finally be important in the Dark World in this chapter, especially with his word jumble being referenced in Deltarune, and of course said word jumble being the only presence of Icy and Undertale. I'd even go as far as to say that we might see Sans acquire the word jumble in this chapter. Ralsei will likely temporarily leave our party in favor of Noelle, who will most certainly be making a FNAF reference at some point. As a little curveball, I'd like to say we'll encounter Friend at some point in this chapter. But lastly, and most importantly, Kris in this chapter is going to lose their hand. Whew, that's a lot. It's just a shame I couldn't predict any of the bosses in this chapter. David Amiago has gone on a lot about Omega Icy, but after Chapter 5, I can't see us getting another direct callback to Omega Flowey. Although there's something to be said about the fact that the Photoshop element is completely absent. I mean, looking at Reverse Undertale again, Photoshop or Omega Flowey has Toby's head inside the TV, with the rest of the body being this Photoshopped abomination. How crazy would it be if we had some kind of Photoshop Icy and the body belonged to Toby and the head was... Wait. My sister burned the box in the grass to kill it, and it smelled like charcoal pizza. She burned out Icy eyes, and he looked evil, and as he said, took it and said we should bury the box, and Kris dug a hole in the ground in the graveyard, and I was so scared a zombie would come up, and I tried to say, Kris, I'm scared, and they turned around with the box over their face. They turned around with the box over their face! Oh my god! That's all for today. Thanks for sticking around till the end. Before we send off though, I'd like to give a huge thanks to our patrons, including Roscoe13, Titleski,
The Sparkling Diamond, and Serenity Solstice.
This is probably my most batshit insane crazy theory yet, but I really hope you guys liked it. I'm gonna try to respond to as many of you guys in the comments as I can, because I really do like this idea and I want it to work. And it's not without its flaws, right? Like I can't really accurately predict for what exact reason the Dark World would be created inside Icy's. I can't refute that Noelle creating a dark fountain because of Rudy's death is not highly likely, as opposed to, say, them trying to get Noelle to create one in Icy's because they think it'll be empty and it'd be like practice or something. I don't know. I feel like Ralsei would have a big problem with that, but who knows? Maybe that's why he leaves the party. Anywho, this has been ronbrazy, and I'll be seeing you all next time. Catch you later, y'all.